The house on Riverside Drive. Me name is Margaret Hayes, and I'm 63 years old. For 37 years, I was married to Robert Hayes, a man who built walls around secrets I never knew existed. Robert was a successful architect. We lived in a beautiful colonial home in Connecticut, raised 2 wonderful children, and to anyone looking from the outside, we had the perfect marriage. But perfection, I've learned, is often just a carefully constructed illusion. There was always one mystery in our marriage. Robert owned another house, a modest Victorian on Riverside Drive, about 40 minutes from our home. He'd inherited it from his late Aunt Dorothy, or so he told me. For 37 years, he forbade me from ever visiting that property. It's full of Dorothy's old things, he'd say, his voice firm. I'll handle it eventually. It's not fit for you to see. I accepted this explanation, as wives of my generation often did. We were taught to trust, to not question too deeply, to let our husbands have their private domains. Robert passed away last October after a sudden heart attack. He was 70 years old. 3 weeks after the funeral, I sat in the office of Martin Pierce, Robert's attorney for over 20 years. Martin was a kind man with gray temples and gentle eyes. He slid an envelope across his mahogany desk. "Margaret," he said softly, "Robert left specific instructions. This envelope contains keys and a letter. He wanted you to have them after his passing." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note in Robert's precise script. "Margaret, I'm sorry for the secrets I kept. The house on Riverside Drive is yours now. Go there. Look for what I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I hope you can forgive me." Robert, I sat in Martin's office for a long time, the key growing warm in my palm. 2 days later, on a gray November afternoon, drove to Riverside Drive. The neighborhood was quiet, with tall oak trees lining the street. The Victorian house was painted pale yellow with white trim, well maintained despite Robert's claims of neglect. My heart pounded as I climbed the porch steps. The key slid easily into the lock, as if it had been used recently. I turned it and pushed open the door. What I saw stopped me cold. The interior was immaculate and beautifully furnished. Fresh flowers sat on a mahogany hall table. The air smelled faintly of lavender. This was no storage space for a dead aunt's belongings. This was someone's home. I walked slowly through the first floor, my mind racing. The living room had comfortable furniture and family photographs on the mantel, but the faces in those photographs made my breath catch. There was Robert younger, smiling, standing with a beautiful woman with warm brown skin and kind eyes. In another photo, Robert sat with the same woman and 3 children, all beaming. At the camera, my legs felt weak. I sank onto the sofa. On the coffee table was a leather journal. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was dated 19881, 1 year after Robert and I married. Dorothy introduced us at her church. The elegant handwriting read, "His name is Robert. He says he's separated, working through a difficult divorce. There's something gentle about him, something broken that calls to my heart." The journal belonged to someone named Caroline Porter. Page after page chronicled a love story that unfolded parallel to my own marriage. Robert had told Caroline he was divorced. He'd built an entire life with her 3 children, Sunday dinners, school plays, graduations. I read for hours as darkness fell outside. Caroline's words were filled with love, faith, and devotion to Robert. She wrote about their daughter Emma's college acceptance, their twin sons Marcus and James joining the military, family Christmases, and quiet Sunday mornings. The final entry was dated 6 months before Robert died. Robert seemed distant today. When I asked if something was wrong, he held me close and said, "I need to make things right, Caroline. I've lived too long with lies." I told him we all carry regrets, but God's grace covers us. He kissed my forehead and said, "I hope so." I closed the journal and looked around this house, this home that Robert had kept hidden from me for nearly 4 decades. Caroline had lived here believing she was Robert's wife. I had lived in Connecticut believing the same thing. We were both his wives, neither of us knowing about the other. The front door opened suddenly, and I jumped. A woman stood in the doorway, the same woman from the photographs, though older now, perhaps 60. She wore a blue coat and carried grocery bags. When she saw me, she froze. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. "I'm Margaret Hayes," I said quietly. "Robert's wife." Her grocery bags fell to the floor. Apples rolled across the hardwood. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm Caroline Porter. I'm Robert's wife." We stared at each other across the room. Two women whose entire lives had just shattered like glass. Caroline moved slowly into the living room and sat in the chair across from me. Her face showed shock, pain, and something else, a strange, sad understanding. "How long?" she asked finally. 37 years. "We married in 1987. She closed her eyes. "We met in 1988. He told me he was divorced. He told me about this house," I said. "But he said it was his Aunt Dorothy's, that it was full of junk. He forbade me from ever coming here." "Dorothy was real," Caroline said softly. "She was his aunt. She introduced us at church. She died in 1995 and left Robert this house. He told me he'd inherited it and wanted us to make it our home." She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. "We raised our children here." "Children," I repeated, my voice breaking. "How many?" "3. Emma is 34. The twins, Marcus and James, are 32. I thought of my own children, David and Sarah, who were 35 and 33. Robert had two families, two complete lives running simultaneously. We sat in silence as the weight of his deception settled over us both. Finally, Caroline spoke. "Why did he do this?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe he loved us both. Maybe he was too cowardly to choose. Maybe he thought he could keep both worlds separate forever." "He almost did," Caroline said bitterly. Then her expression softened. "But he left you the key. He wanted you to know. He wanted someone to tell you the truth," I said. "He couldn't face it himself, so he left it for me to discover and for you to find out this way." Caroline wiped her eyes. "That's the coward's way." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." We talked for hours that night. We shared stories about Robert, discovering the different versions of the man we'd both loved. With Caroline, he'd been more spontaneous, attending church regularly, coaching Little League. With me, he'd been reserved, focused on his architectural work, preferring quiet evenings at home. He'd given different pieces of himself to each of us. Never wholly either. "What do we do now?" Caroline asked as midnight approached. I looked around the house that had held Robert's secret for so long. An idea had been forming in my mind, something that felt both like justice and mercy. "We tell our children the truth," I said. "They deserve to know they have siblings." And then, I paused, meeting Caroline's eyes. "I'd like to suggest something unusual." She waited. "Robert left me this house in his will. It's legally mine, but it's your home, where you raised your children. I don't want to take that from you." "What are you saying?" Caroline asked carefully. "Saying that Robert took enough from both of us. I won't take your home too. This house is yours, Caroline. I'll have the deed transferred to your name." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're not my enemy. You're another woman who loved a man who wasn't brave enough to be honest. You raised 3 children here. You made this house a home. That matters more than legal documents." Caroline reached across and took my hand. We sat there, two women joined by betrayal, choosing kindness over anger. Over the following months, Caroline and I navigated the complicated process of blending our families. It wasn't easy. Our children struggled with anger, confusion, and grief. David, my oldest, wanted nothing to do with his half-siblings at first. Emma felt betrayed by the father she'd idolized, but slowly, connections formed. Sarah and Emma discovered they'd both inherited Robert's love of gardening. Marcus and James invited David to a baseball game. Small bridges were built over the chasm Robert's secrets had created. Caroline and I met regularly for coffee. We weren't exactly friends, our connection was too complicated for such a simple word. But we shared and understand a bond forged in the strange fire of shared betrayal. One spring afternoon, almost a year after I'd first opened that door on Riverside Drive, Caroline and I sat on our porch watching our children in the yard. All 5 of them were there, awkward still, but laughing together as James told some ridiculous story. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Caroline asked quietly. I considered the question. I don't know. Some days I'm angry at what he stole from both of us: honesty, choice, the chance to live authentic lives. Other days, I look at our children together and think something good came from all this pain. I understand, Caroline said. I've been thinking about forgiveness too. Not for his sake, he's beyond caring now, but for mine. Carrying anger gets heavy. It does, I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd learned that life rarely gives us the stories we expect. Sometimes it gives us something harder, something that requires us to choose who we want to be in the aftermath of someone else's choices. Robert left me more than a key and a house on Riverside Drive. He left me a choice: to meet betrayal with bitterness or with grace, to push away or to reach across, to stay trapped in anger or to forge something new from broken pieces. I think about that choice every day. I won't pretend it's easy, or that some days I don't feel rage at what Robert did. But I've learned that we can't control what others do to us. We can only control who we choose to be in response. Caroline and I chose kindness. We chose truth. We chose to protect the home she'd built and to help our children find their way through the rubble of their father's double life. Sometimes people ask if I regret opening that door, if I wish I'd stayed ignorant of Robert's secrets. The answer is complicated. Ignorance was easier, certainly, but it wasn't real. It wasn't truth. I'd rather live in the truth, however painful, than in a beautiful lie. The house on Riverside Drive stands as it always has, pale yellow with white trim. But now it represents something different to me: not Robert's deception, but Caroline's strength and resilience. Not secrets and lies, but the possibility of choosing grace, even when grace isn't deserved. That's the story I carry with me now. Not the story of a man who lived two lives, but the story of two women who found their way through the wreckage to something like peace. And in the end, perhaps that's the only revenge that matters: to refuse to let someone else's betrayal make us cruel. To choose instead to be kind, to be honest, to be whole. Robert built walls around his secrets. Caroline and I tore them down. And in the space where those walls once stood, we planted something better: truth, forgiveness, and the quiet dignity of women who refuse to be diminished by a man's choices. That's my story. That's what I found behind the door on Riverside Drive.